Chapter 15. Ollie emerged from the wood, walking with equal parts determination and fatigue. Tuck's breathing was steady, but the strips of cloth Ollie had wrapped around him, they were stained red. It was impossible to know how bad the bleeding was without removing the makeshift bandages, and he didn't dare do that. Ollie was in a rough state too, breathing hard, mouth dry, cheeks soaked with blood-mixed tears. Once he'd gotten past the wall, he'd stopped to rip up his cloak into bandages for Tuck, and he'd taken a moment to look himself over. He was like a rag doll who'd gotten into a fight with a pair of knives. A gash near his bicep looked particularly bloody, and he tried to wrap it as best he could. Exhausted and sore, his thighs and arms bleeding, Ollie cursed himself for ever having gone beyond the wall. He should have doubled down, settled for the small game in the outer bands, and just muddled through the winter as best he could. Instead, he'd gone ahead and gotten Tuck maimed, maybe killed. And where did that leave him? He was still crying as he left the wood, snot dripping into his upper lip. To his shame, Ollie wasn't crying for Tuck. Even if Tuck survived, it would be weeks or more before he would hunt again. And what would Ollie do in the meantime? It was near impossible to bring in enough game with Tuck sniffing it out. But without him, Ollie wouldn't catch much. He could navigate the wood without Tuck, but slowly, and not while also tracking game. Lars had been the only one Ollie knew who'd figured out how to hunt alone. But he also didn't have anyone else to care for. But not Ollie. His mother and sister depended on him. They needed him. His mother earned hardly enough to pay off the debts that she had been left when her husband had died. It was Ollie's responsibility to keep food on the table, and he had failed. If this winter had spelled disaster before, now the first flurries of snow would most certainly herald at least one grave in the Ricker home. Inej saw him coming, his Velk eyes keen enough to make out Ollie before Ollie would have ever spotted the giant. By the time he arrived, Inej was ready with a pitcher of water and a clean cloth. "I'm a tanner," Inej said as soon as Ollie was within earshot. "Don't be expecting miracles." Ollie nodded gingerly, laying Tuck down on the same wooden table Inej had skinned the deer the day before. The sun was just beginning its descent below the hill to the west, the mansions on the hilltop haloed in orange light. The two worked side by side, man and giant, racing against the looming dark. They removed the bandages and cleaned Tuck's wounds with water from Inej's well. With the blood cleaned from the fur, they could make out a pair of jagged slices along his belly, each a finger long and a fingernail deep. Tuck whimpered and gave a weak growl. "It ain't good," Inej said. "Best sew him up, and quick." "He'll live?" "Not if we don't sew him up." Ollie nodded numbly as Inej disappeared into the cabin, emerging a moment later with a small sewing kit, not unlike Ollie's own. Ollie nearly offered to do the work himself, but a quick glance down at his own bloody hands told him he was still shaking far too much. "Best hold him still," Inej said. "Don't think he'll like this much." It was terrible work. Ollie struggled to keep Tuck pinned to the table as he barked and moaned. Inej's needle was a blur, moving in and out of Tuck's skin, pulling the wound closed with quick tugs of the thread. The Velk's fingers moved daftly, poking and pulling on the needle with such precision that Ollie wondered if Inej's mother was a seamstress back wherever he'd grown up. If Velks had mothers, that is. or seamstresses. But the way blood leaked from the wound in small spurts was a firm reminder that this was his friend and not some piece of cloth being stitched up. Eventually, Tuck stopped shaking and growling, his body too weak for anything except pitiful whimpering. Inej placed a small stack of clean cloth over the wound, then tied it down with twine. Then Inej gently lifted Tuck and began carrying him towards the cottage. Best let him rest for a time before you make your way up the hill. He's asleep. Waking him would be a fool's work. Inej paused, narrowing his eyes at Oli. First, though, you grab that bucket and cloth and go out back. Draw some water, clean up. This is a tanner's house, not the trash pile. Oli nodded and grabbed the bucket and the least bloodied cloth. The well was a simple thing. Stones stacked around a hole in the ground, a large rope coiled beside it, ready to be tied around the bucket's handle. Oli had left the tattered remains of his cloak near the wall, and now he stripped what remained of his clothes, groaning as he pulled his shirt and trousers away from the wounds on his arms and legs. Naked, he worked at removing the dried blood from his skin, carefully taking stock of himself as he went. His thighs, stomach, and chest were a mess of shallow cuts, but they'd heal up well enough. His bicep had taken most of the beating, purple bruising blossoming around a short and jagged gash. Oli cursed as he cleaned it, flinching at his own touch. He should have been cold, naked, and with the wind nipping at him. But all he could feel was with the pain in his arm. Otherwise, thoughts of Tuck had him unfeeling. Inej cursed as well, stomping out around the house toward him. Oi, how'd you get that pup all the way back here with an arm like that? Oli didn't answer, and Inej didn't press the point. Instead, the tanner produced a small jar of ointment and clean linen, then gestured for Oli to hold out his arm. The smell of honey and turmeric washed from the jar when it opened, leaving Oli lightheaded and the world slowly shifting. Steady now, Inej said, holding Oli as he began to sway. Inej worked with the same deft and intentional movements as he had with Tuck. And in moments, a small bit of ointment filled Oli's cuts, and a strip of linen was wrapped around his arm. Now get dressed and come in. Stew should be ready. Oli sat beside the hearth in the only chair Inej owned that was sized for mere humans. His belly content, if not full. He had a mug of warm ale in both hands. Tuck asleep beside the hearth near his feet. He's alive, Oli thought for the 1,000th time. It actually says for the 12th time. I don't know why I changed it to 1,000th. Let me try that again. He's alive, Oli thought for the 12th time. Relief came with that thought, but was quickly replaced with regret when he considered the wasted wolf pelts left in the wood, just to be devoured. And then there would be the relief of knowing Tuck was alive, and then the image of the wolf pelt and the cycle would repeat. But in the end, Tuck was alive. For now, at least. But he wasn't healed yet. And nothing was guaranteed. Inej sat beside Oli, his bulk resting on a chair made of thick cedar beams and large strips of animal hide. In the Velk's mouth was a pipe of pale briarwood, which puffed smoke to the rafters. His eyes watched the flames, reflecting that light back into the world. Oli had never been in Inej's house before, and it felt oddly comfortable. Well made, with stone walls, thick wooden rafters, holding up a sturdy roof. Animal hides were everywhere. A massive bear pelt was the rug beneath Oli's feet, and the pelts of foxes and wolves had been sewn together to make blankets that draped over a bed large enough to sleep a family of 6. On the walls hung pelts the color of black and ivory, beasts that Ollie couldn't place. In the dead of winter, Inej's cabin may well be the warmest place and watchful, with all the furs to hold in the heat and keep out the cold. But what truly kept drawing Ollie's eyes, more than the trophy heads on the wall or the massive bed in the corner, were the spear and the shield laid against the side of the hearth. The shield was perhaps as tall as Ollie was, and the spear far taller, its shaft as thick as Ollie's fist, and the spearhead as long as his forearm. It was a truly inhuman thing, an object that made it all the clearer. Inej was from another land entirely, another world as far as Ollie was concerned. With a weapon like that, the Velk could skewer a fully grown bear in one thrust. What would it have been like, Ollie wondered, to have fought against such giants back at the start of the Second Era? The war with Velik was heralded as a great Trevlarian victory, but it seemed an impossibility that humans like Ollie could ever have stood against Velik for one battle, let alone win a war. I'm grateful, Inej, Ollie said, or tried to say. It came out like a hoarse whisper off a parched tongue. Ollie took another swig of ale, then repeated, I'm grateful to you. Inej answered by leaning back and blowing a ring of smoke up into the vaulted ceiling. The deep, eh? Ollie nodded. Alone, I suppose, Inej said, shaking his head. Your pa would be proud. That's about the only good that but that's about the only good that'll come of it. Ollie bristled. Squirrel jerky and rabbit don't get much coin. I need something the merchants would buy. I was less than a mile or so past the wall when Tut caught a whiff of a deer worthy of even your walls. Ollie gestured at one hand to the animal trophies hanging about. If I'd been faster, Ollie trailed off. Inej's eyes furrowed. It's hard times for you folk. Dangerous, too. Getting all the more dangerous. Ollie turned, looking the Velk over. How old was he? The giants didn't age like normal men, but Ollie figured that tinges of gray in his matted beard meant he wasn't young. The look in his eyes, the way they were hard in the center and soft about the edges, he must be getting old. You know something I don't? Ollie asked. Inej chuckled. Maybe a thing or two, but probably less. No, I don't know anything. I do suspect some things, and hear things from people who think they know. Lars. Inej nodded. Lars, aye, but more than him. All you Strayazar come to me. The wood is more dangerous today than yesterday, and it will be more dangerous tomorrow. He took a long puff from his pipe, then blew the smoke gruffly out through his nostrils. Something's brewing. Ollie scratched his chin. You wasn't always a tanner. Inej nodded, slow and steady. That's right. Ollie pointed to the large shield and spear. Were you a fighter, then? Over in the mountains? We're all fighters. Ollie grunted. Everyone in Watchful grew up in the shadow of the Navita Mountains, knowing the other side of those peaks was Velik, the home of the giants, a whole kingdom of people like Inej. So why'd you come here? Why be a tanner? Inej turned to Ollie, lips firm around his pipe. Ollie met his gaze and felt the familiar twisting inside at the sight of his shattered iris. There was a story there, but Ollie figured he'd always be too afraid to ask. I was called, Inej said after a moment, like the rest of us. Ollie said nothing. I was called. Called was a Strayazar word, laced with meaning for those of the wood, but Inej wasn't of the Strayazar, yet he understood the wood as though he were one. Ollie leaned forward. Well, I best get Tuck home and get him settled. If I leave now, might even get to see the merchant stalls before they close up. See what it is they brought with them. Inej laughed humorously. I wouldn't be expecting to find no merchants up the hill, if that's what you're thinking. I saw him driving up in the dead of night. You telling me I saw ghosts? You saw something come up the hill. I saw him, mind. I saw him too, mind. But they ain't no merchants. Ghosts may be more like it, seeing as the last time Trevlarian royalty came on through, it was a bloodbath. Don't suppose nobody remembers that, though. Royalty? Aye, Inej said. You heard right. Princess Leonie Baudelaire, daughter of the king, rode into old Spectare last night and has been causing quite the ruckus. Ulian said she's done confiscated every room in his inn, as well as the Penny's rooms, and Tote's entire mansion, if you can believe that. Ollie couldn't believe it, and he said so. Well, believe it or not, there's finally something stranger here than even the wood and all its happenings. Inej leaned in close toward Ollie, tapping the stem of his pipe on his bearded cheek. Mark my words, woodsman. This won't end well. Folk by here don't remember it now, but us folk across the mountains do. When the eyes of the king fall upon the Vromia, then that is bad omen indeed. History is like a wheel going about over an endless road. Spectare, Ollie thought. Vromia. His father had used words like those, and Ollie had thought they had died with the man. To hear Inej use them, and to hear the giant talk about the princess and old wars, it made him dizzy all over again. Just let me get Tuck home. Then we'll both sleep, and in the morning, the nightmare will be over. I figured you'd know by now. Running away, it don't make the nightmares end. Inej turned toward the fire at the mantel. Just keeps the dream going. Besides, if you move the pup, he might not. A pounding at the door cut Inej's words short. Inej stood looking at Ollie as if he might know who was knocking, but Ollie only shrugged. What in the depths? Inej muttered to himself, putting his pipe back in his lips, the bowl of which still trailed smoke. In 2 strides, Inej had made it to the door, and he swung it open. Aye, Inej growled. Who might you be? With Inej's bulk looming in the doorway, Ollie couldn't see who was on the other side, nor could he hear anything other than the Velk's own rumbling baritone replies. And what has it got to do with me? Inej said, puffs of smoke billowing up around his head. There was a muffled reply, and Ollie thought it might be a man's voice. Something about the whole interaction made his ears burn and sweat bead on the back of his neck, though he didn't know why. He spared a glance at Tuck, then stood and turned toward the door, hand moving to the hilt of his knife. Aye, I know him, Inej said. More muffled talk, followed by silence. Inej was shuffling his feet, and Ollie watched as one of the giant's hands slipped behind his back, gently lifting up his shirt to reveal a blade sheathed there. It was probably a small dagger in the giant's hands, though to a man it would have been a short sword. Ollie moved toward the door in about 4 strides of his own. Oi, he said, putting a hand on Inej's arm and nudging him aside. What is it? What is it? Inej let the handle of the blade go, then turned to the side so Ollie could see the newcomers. The sun was casting colors of twilight on the eastern mountains, pinks and oranges splayed out on distant peaks, brilliant enough to be painted and framed inside one of the homes up the hill. But Ollie, he didn't see the beauty of those distant mountains. For in front of him was a familiar-looking man with a pretentious caterpillar of a mustache and black hair curled in tight loops. Behind him stood 2 men in chainmail, and travel-stained orange surcoats. Their eyes narrowed on Inej, and their hands held fast to the pommel of their swords. A few paces to the side was a hooded figure whose face Ollie couldn't make out, though he saw the unstrung bow on their back. "There he is," the younger man said to the soldiers behind him. Then to Inej he growled, "You just said he wasn't here." Inej cocked an eyebrow. "Don't recall saying anything of the sort. All I said is I know him." The soldiers exchanged looks, and the younger man looked ready to object, but Ollie cut in. "Oi, you're Winston, the tote boy." Winston looked back at Ollie, then screwed up in either disgust or insult. "Obviously, and I am here on important business from the crown." Ollie hardly listened, his mind racing through his conversation with his sister. It was only last night, but last night felt like a long way off now. If he remembered right, this was the man harassing Layla. He'd come to Inej's home looking for him. Ollie's eyes darted to the trees behind, to the men behind Winston. To the trees. Where did I even get trees from? Ollie's eyes darted to the men behind Winston, eyeing their strange colors. He couldn't think if he'd ever seen orange fabric like that before, especially not so travel-worn. "And these," Ollie pointed to the men behind Winston, "are your guards?" Winston turned about, looking uncomfortable. No. They're men from the guard of the royal princess. This is why I've come, you see." Ollie stopped listening, though Winston's mouth kept moving a moment longer. What Ollie saw in front of him was a barrier, an obstacle, stopping his sister from honest wages and the freedom to move about watchful without being harassed. He saw danger, a threat, a beast. Ollie crossed the threshold of the home in one stride, and then he was in front of Winston in one more. In the same motion, his good arm shot out, fist balled, cracking against Winston's eye. Winston dropped to the ground with a cry that wasn't quite loud enough to drown out the sound of swords sliding from scabbards. Ollie spared a glance at the soldiers, expecting them to spring toward him, but they didn't. Instead, they took cautious steps back, their blades resting in front of them defensively. And they weren't looking at Ollie. They were looking behind him. Ollie turned, but Inej was doing nothing other than chuckling, leaning back against the doorframe and blowing a particularly large puff of smoke up into the air. Ollie looked back to Winston, stepping above him as he writhed, hand over his face, as he slung curses haphazardly. "What in Lazarus?" Winston yelled, looking at Ollie, though, through his one good eye. The other eye he covered with one hand while he backed himself up along the ground toward the soldiers. "Why would you—" "Oi, how about you keep yourself away from my sister, eh?" Ollie snapped. Winston froze, mouth agasp. "How dare you?" Ollie lurched forward, grabbing Winston's shirt collar, jerking him up with one hand while the other yanked the knife from its sheath, lifting it to Winston's throat. Part of Ollie's brain acknowledged the pain shooting through his arm, but it was easy enough to ignore with Winston's lip quivering before him. The soldiers still held their positions, but their eyes, they were no longer on Inej. They looked at Ollie now, wary and frightened. Ollie imagined what he must look like to them, his clothes caked with dried blood, his arm bandaged, a stench reeking off of him that even he noticed. Even his blade was still marred in wolf's blood. He looked like an animal, a beast. Winston's breath came in ragged gasps, hot against Ollie's face. Ollie's voice was hoarse. "If Layla don't get decent work by tomorrow's eve, it won't be my fist, but my blade in that eye of yours. You hear me?" Winston said nothing, though the eye widened and his face paled. Ollie gave him a quick jerk, rattling him out of shock. "Leave my sister alone. And you best go back to Yiggins and let him know that he should be giving her work. Now, nod your head if you're hearing me. Winston nodded frantically. Good. Now get it going. Best not waste time. Ollie dropped Winston to the ground, and he skittered backwards, standing up when he was a few paces away, never looking away from Ollie, who was looking toward the soldiers. They weren't a threat, though, and they seemed not to care about Winston at all. They had returned their stares to Inej, likely the only one they saw as a threat. But where was... Then Ollie saw him, the cloaked man, except it wasn't a man, but a woman. She had dropped the hood of her cloak, her dark hair falling in uneven lumps around her shoulders. Her hands were clad in fingerless gloves, held out before her as if to calm Ollie down, taming a wild beast. Out with it, Ollie said, shoving his blade back into its sheath. Winston had gone now, running back up the hill with fretful glances back toward Ollie. I'm too tired for games, in case you can't tell. The woman lowered her hands, then gestured to the guards, who, after a long pause, sheathed their swords. She was pretty, her skin olive and feminine, but marked with subtle scars and calluses on her fingers, which served as a testament that she knew how to use the bow slung over her back. She was Badawai, if only in part. It was the way she moved that was the giveaway, careful and brisk all at the same time. Her arms and legs totally controlled. Ollie felt a burst of self-consciousness as she stepped toward him, and he placed his hands on his hips, unsure what else to do with them. Are you Oli Ricker? Aye, who's asking? I am Tal, ranger in service to King Baudelaire, on assignment from his daughter, Princess Leonie Baudelaire. She has, as I understand it, invited you to dinner. Ollie had nearly told her to screw off when the meaning of Tal's words sank in. Instead, he mumbled a dumbstruck, What? Tal smiled. It is best to say yes and then come along. We'll need to get you new clothes, and we should be quick about it. The princess is not one to be kept waiting, and supper will soon be served if it is not already. New clothes? Ollie looked down at his bandaged arm, his ripped pants, blood-stained shirt. Aye, Tal said, stepping forward and giving Ollie a cautious sniff. Shame we haven't time for a bath, too. It'll be all right, though. The princess isn't the squeamish type. The princess. Ollie's mind was more than numb. It had gone totally blank. There was no reference point for it to work from, no understanding to grab onto and make sense of the woman's words. Go on. Go on, Inej called out, stepping back inside of his home. Tuck will be safe with me. You best get going. Royals have a way of hanging them people who say no. And then he shut the door, the thump of it like thunder. Ollie looked at the closed door and gave a nod of approval. Tal looked at the closed door and gave a nod of approval, then turned and began marching up toward Watchful proper. Oi, Ollie said, jogging until he was walking alongside of her. I don't understand. Why does the Ollie stopped, unable to say the word. Why did she want to see me? Tal didn't look his way, but Ollie watched her lips purse, as if she were trying out different replies in her mind. It isn't you, exactly. She ordered Winston to bring her the local huntsman. Strayazar, is that what you call yourselves? Ollie nodded. I spent the whole day following that Sigmund around, and you are the only one we found. They walked in silence then, Ollie's mind trying to catch up to their feet. By the time they were in the town proper, the sky was dark and the only light in the street spilt from the downwind's windows and open doorways, the sound of clanging mugs and chatter spilling out along with it. Beyond the tavern, the whole of Watchful was bustling, even in the sun's absence. Where normally there would be a quiet street in the wake of sunset, now there were wheelbarrows of dirt and picked crops being moved about, handcarts with boxes being wheeled this way or that, pairs of folk of all kinds standing in doorways and alleyways conspiring, and soldiers, so many soldiers, stomping about and rattling chainmail, barking orders to one another, and each looking insufferably important. Most were the same strange orange as the soldiers, though Ollie caught sight of hooded figures like Tall who moved in the shadows and away from the torchlit streets. Soon they passed the Riker home, and Ollie breathed out a prayer of thanks that neither his mother nor Layla peeked outside. Trying to explain whatever was happening to him right now would have been too much. It was all he could do already. It was all too much already, and there was small mercy in each step that put his home further behind. Strange, isn't it? Tal said, glancing to him. Which thing? That we didn't find anyone else, just you. Most people aren't sure where the others live, and what homes we did find were empty. Ollie snorted. I ain't surprised. He was the only one of the Strayazar living in town. All the others lived as hermits in cottages or shacks up and down the tree line, miles away. Lars was in town often enough, but he wouldn't drag himself in for ale until later in the evening. Wouldn't have done you any good anyways, if you found them all. Most wouldn't have come. Lanterns hung on makeshift poles, giving light to everyone working on the street, and Ollie had never seen so much of the town lit up by firelight before, and he wasn't sure how he felt about it. Wood and oil were precious here, but it was being spent in surplus now. Tall leaned closer, her face reflecting the orange glow of those new lights. So why are you coming then? Too tired to argue, I guess. They walked in silence the rest of the way. Wooden construction faded into the nicer stone and brickwork of the homes further up the hill. The dirt path turned to cobblestone. The presence of soldiers doubled, and Ollie watched in shock as dozens worked hard to construct a form of low wall in the middle of the street. A choke point, Tal said as they passed. A what? It brings your enemies to a narrow place so you can fight there in smaller groups. It makes superior numbers more manageable. Ollie stared at Tal. What in Yalasi are you talking about? I would no longer be so quick to speak the name of damnation. It strikes much too close to home. Ollie spat to the side. I don't understand anything anymore. It will be quite the dinner, Tal said with a frown. For what it's worth. I am sorry. Ollie shook his head. His head hurt, and he rubbed his forehead. Tuck nearly dead, royalty instead of merchants, a dinner invitation from the princess, all on the heels of nearly becoming wolf food. And didn't his arm hurt? Ollie prodded his bicep with a finger, sending a stab of pain through him. Ironically, it made him feel better, more grounded. This day needs to end. At the top of the hill, the ground leveled out, and the number of torches increased, their light dimming the stars above. Only 3 homes stood at the hill's top, though home was hardly the right word. They were small castles of stonework, far beyond anything the tradesmen of Watchful could have dreamed of. Their windowsills had curved, soft edges, and the windows themselves had been made of clear, thick glass. The doors were dark timber, carved with ancient runes. Ulian had shown more than a little interest in them. Around each home stood walls of stone, 8 paces high and topped with iron stakes, and the gates were guarded with the only armed and armored men guarded by the only armored men and women and watchful. Or they usually were. Tonight, though, they were far more than just guarded. The whole place was under occupation, the 3 homes all centered around one main courtyard, which had become an encampment. A bony woman sharpened swords at a grinding stone, her eyes intense. Pots of food hung above fires spread all about, each one tended by a single cook who walked about pot to pot with a spoon as long as his forearm and an apron covered in motley stains. Supply wagons filled with people rummaging through crates lined the courtyard, their wheels wedged with rocks and their harnesses horseless. Bet they've had a terrible time with their horses, Ollie thought. The merchants had to rent stalls in the barns at the feet of the hill, where their steeds would usually start to go crazy from the call until the merchants paid a small fee for the beasts to be drugged. The courtyard was a mad flurry of activity, and Ollie slowed his pace to take it all in, eyes darting about trying to make sense of it. One of the soldiers, trailing Ollie, gave him a nudge with a large hand. "Get on," the man muttered. Ollie obliged, catching up to Tall, who was winding her way through the throng of people, making for the northern mansion. They passed through the gate to find Winston near the door, talking with a tall and well-armored man with shoulder-length hair and a beard as pristinely trimmed as Winston's mustache. The man was uninterested in Winston, who was growing red-faced as he talked. When Tall stepped into the courtyard, the men turned from Winston entirely and made toward them. "Found one," he said to Tall as he eyed Ollie. "Aye," Tall said, turning and looking to Ollie, "but only one. He did a number on Winston, though you heard. Something about his sister." The man ran his gloved hand over his beard. He looked ready to say something, but Winston barged forward, finger jabbing at Ollie. "That's him, Captain. That's the man." The captain sighed and looked at Winston coldly. "Take your backwater problems somewhere else, Mr. Tote. I have neither the time nor the patience. You," he said, finger pointing to Ollie's chest, "get cleaned up and get inside. The princess is waiting, and that's rarely a good thing for anyone. Tall, see it done." Then he turned and was immediately on to other things. Tall turned to Ollie. "Come on. One of my men is about your size, I think. We'll see what we can do." Tall marched off around the side of the home, Ollie in tow, both of them leaving an angry and helpless Winston stuttering near the front door.